Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure. My name is Madeline Stiers. Today, we're going to be talking about contemplative self-care practices for Christian helping professionals. If you will excuse me periodically to grab a drink of water, I'm going to take a self-care pause, take a sip. I have a dry mouth today, so please bear with me with that. We also have a new podium, so I'm working to get used to that. Yes. So if you send in questions, we will have time at the end to answer some of those. If we have someone kind of monitoring that, they may pop them up while I'm speaking as well. So hopefully I can get to any questions that the audience or near and afar have. Let's see. This is a presentation that I initially did a year or so ago with a colleague of mine, Veronica Timbers. She's actually now at Boise State. She is a classmate of mine. I'm currently in the process of getting my PhD. So I'm just going to give her a shout out. She made the beautiful slides today. Today we're going to talk about, the beginning, we're going to briefly consider our current self-care practices. We're going to pause. We're going to do a little practice here at the beginning to reflect on that. Then we're going to review some research talking about burnout, secondary stress, what mindfulness looks like from a Christian perspective, but also some compassion satisfaction as well. And then we will run through some sample contemplative practices for self-care, mindfulness, things like that. We may practice one if we have time together as a group. If not, I will run through them and kind of give a brief description, and they're all on the slides, which I think you all have available to you. So, self-care, right? Maybe you are here watching this presentation because you are totally on top of your self-care, and every day you have a little thing or a big thing that you do, and you're like, I'm very good at putting my self-care on the calendar and scheduling out time. If that's the case, wonderful. Maybe you're here because you're realizing through the course of this pandemic, I have lost some of my self-care. Maybe the season that I'm in life, I've not been able to attend to those needs, and I'm really needing a little bit of a refresher. And so maybe you're sitting at your computer, or you're here in the audience, really, paying attention to this. And maybe you're still in the season of life where things are very chaotic and you're running around and you wanted to attend this. So you put it on and it's sitting on your computer in the background while you're at work doing other things. If that's the case, we're still happy to have you. That's a little bit of work towards the self-care, wanting to do the things that you might find enjoyable. And I hope you find this presentation enjoyable. Self-care is the thing that we talk about with our clients as practitioners, social workers, LPCs, psychologists. Whatever type of therapy or modality that we're working with individuals from, self-care is something that we always come back to, whether it's a coping skill or just general hygiene level, daily living tasks. Self-care is something we always come back to, but it's not something that we think about for ourselves, maybe as much as we think about for our clients. So we preach it every day. Why do we still have problems or difficulties ourselves implementing our self-care? So I want you to pause and reflect on that question. Why do you think as practitioners, we may still struggle with our own self-care needs? If you have a pen or a paper, you can pull that out. You can grab your phone. Excuse me. You can do it in your head, whatever works. And I want you to list your current self-care practices. Not the ones that you like, that you're not doing, but the ones that you are doing in the last few weeks. What self-care, oops, I'm messing up the speaker, sorry. What self-care practices have you engaged in? You can note just general practices. They can be spiritually centered ones. I'm gonna give you a few moments to do that. Okay. If you're still writing, please go ahead, keep going. Now that you've listed them out, I want you to rank them. You can rank them from 1 to 10 or whatever, 1 being most helpful, 10 being least helpful, or you can list 1s next to all of your favorite ones, 2s next to all of your second favorite ones, and then 3s and 4s, so on and so forth. Whatever works best for you. And as you're ranking them, maybe lower on the page, lower in your notes app, different space in your head, I want you to think about some of the things that prevent you from practicing your self-care. What are some areas of self-care that you want to start engaging in? So I said, list the things you are doing. Now you can list the things that you would like to be doing, and maybe you can mark next to it, what's getting in the way of that? Is it work? Is it our personal life? Is it school? Is it energy levels? Our physical health? Our spiritual health? So like I said, maybe some of you here today have a really strong sense of routine for your self-care. And this was a validating process for you. You go, yeah, I am taking care of myself. That's the case, wonderful, because we all know that self-care is not easy. We talk about it like, oh, just go get a massage or take a bath. And yeah, those can be wonderful. But self-care for me looks like going to the doctor when I need to go to the doctor, taking a break to grab a drink of water, pausing in my office to stretch when I notice my body is not where it needs to be. It's not always getting my nails done, right? If you're here today doing this activity and you're realizing, okay, or maybe you already knew that you are struggling with your self-care, give yourself a little grace in the moment and say, I noticed it, I see it, it's here, and maybe I can try to take some steps to work towards that. Maybe you can't. Maybe you're in the season of life where you don't have the space and your energy doesn't need to be given elsewhere. If that's the case, know that a point where it will come where you can implement some, even if just the smallest little bit of self-care. We'll talk about what some of that looks like. I know I'm kind of preaching general right now. A lot of this is information you may know. I mean, we talk about it with our clients as healthcare professionals, mental health professionals, and sometimes it's nice to get a reminder for ourselves, right? We're our own worst patients, I think is what we say. So thank you. I hope that this is something that you can reflect back on later today or later this week, or maybe it's something you can do in 2 months. What was that thing I went to a few months ago? And I had listed out some stuff. Let me come back to that. So maybe you put this somewhere safe that you can pull out later. All right, let's jump into the research, the fun stuff, right? All of it's fun. So we know that social workers and other helping professionals are subject to stress, psychological distress, physical distress, all types of extreme stress in our work environment. Depending on where we work, we may experience different levels of that. But being in the helping profession, we often give and give, and we work in a field that needs and needs. So there's no end to the giving. And so oftentimes we fall into the cycle of giving and need to pause and reflect on how we can bring ourselves back to our own self-care. When we talk about self-care and the psychological distress that we experience as helping professionals, there's secondary trauma. We'll talk about that today. There's also vicarious trauma, which is similar. We have compassion fatigue, and we have burnout. Burnout's the big one that we talk about. We hear that, oh, I'm just so burnt out today. I'm so burnt out. If that's you today, like I said, please know you're not alone. Sometimes that's helpful to know. Sometimes it's not. But it does happen. The points in my career, I've been burnt out, and you're probably going, she's so young. How has that happened? It happens. We know, we work in this field. There's no shame, even if there's no reason for shame, even if that shame does come up. It's something that we just have to manage and deal with working in this field. 23% of the helping professionals, this is a study that was done in 2018, 23% of them reported that they had experienced burnout very often or always. That's almost a quarter of the profession, that's a lot. And then almost half, 44%, reported sometimes. So we can't just add those together and say, it's almost 75%, but it's, a large chunk of our field is experiencing burnout. They're experiencing stress that is not being managed, and whether it's at work or at home, and there's so much happening. And we, of course, know that with the pandemic that has hit, everything was exacerbated. Those of you working in federally qualified health clinics or hospitals were already kind of being, dealing with so much coming at us, and the pandemic hit, and then it just kind of blew up, right? So these numbers are validating sometimes in the sense of I'm not the only one, and they're also shocking in the sense of, oh my gosh, this is so much. This is so many of us. And if you've ever been at a point of burnout or close to, it's not fun. We know what that's like. The World Health Organization has actually added burnout to the ICD-11. It's listed as an occupational phenomenon. Here I am moving the speaker again. Are we good? Yeah, okay. It's listed as an occupational phenomenon, not a medical diagnosis. So it's basically listed as something that could lead someone to seek treatment, medical, physical, any sort of healthcare treatment, psychological, obviously. That's pretty extreme that we have now listed burnout in the ICD to say like, oh, this is a thing that's happening that needs to be recognized and then treated. It's defined as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not successfully been managed. We can't always do something about the chronic workplace stress. You quit and get a new job. But say you like your job. We may not be able to manage that. But what can we manage is how we're responding to it, our metacognitions, how much we're aware of all of that, which we'll talk about in the practices today. So while we can't necessarily change all factors that contribute to burnout, we can address some of them by implementing self-care. Obviously, it's characterized by feelings of depletion, mental distance, feeling just cynical about work, really kind of pulling away and not being interested, not really caring, being less professional, which we know in our field can lead to negative effects for the clients or the people that we're working with. Another study defined burnout as being comprised of these three. So low perceived personal accomplishment. So it's perceived personal accomplishment, emotional exhaustion, and depersonalization from the job. On these next few slides, I have a few of the questions that were in the survey that was sent out in this study. So for the section of perceived personal accomplishments, these are some of the items that individuals had to rank where they sat with. Feeling very energetic, understanding how my service users felt about things, about their experience, feeling like I'm effectively working with them, dealing with my emotional problems in my work well, feeling exhilarated after work, feeling like I've accomplished something worthwhile. So individuals who have experienced burnout or are working towards that are going to rank these lower. They're not experiencing perceived professional or a perceived personal accomplishment in their job. I think for this, a lot of us have been at this end where we're like, yes, I feel all of these things. And then some days we go, I feel none of these things. And then the next day we're back to this. I think that happens if it sits where you're experiencing none of these more and more days, and it stays chronic like this is something to pay attention to. That could be hinting like, oh, am I managing my stress? Am I working towards burnout? With emotional exhaustion, here are some of the items that were listed. So individuals who are feeling more emotional exhaustion agreed with these. So I feel emotionally drained from my work. I feel used up. I'm frustrated by my job. Working directly with people puts too much stress on me. This is one that I feel when I'm working towards burnout, like anybody. I just don't want to see people. I'm like, I can't deal with people right now. So that's a big sign for me that am I overworking myself? Am I taking care of myself? Where can I pause and reflect a little bit? I feel like I'm at the end of my rope, feeling like you're going to snap at people at work, things like that. Again, things to be paying attention to. All just good reminders. We're all kind of aware of this, just good things to think about. And then depersonalization from the job. This individuals who, in the study that marked that they high on this, had high depersonalization from the job. So I feel my service users blame me for some of their problems. I don't really care what happens to some of my service users. I worry that this job is hardening me emotionally. I have become more unsympathetic, right? And we have days like this, right? Days are okay. But when we start to sit in these emotions or apathy long, we're really noticing that people work towards burnout when they just don't care at work. They've lost really their sense of care for people and their job. And working in the helping profession, I think most of us got into this profession because we wanted to help people and we felt this was our calling. So when we start to go, I don't really care what happens to these people. I don't really feel like I'm helping. It's something to think about, right? It's sad. It's not a fun place to be. So we've talked about burnout. Let's talk about Christian-specific burnout. So the Christian-specific burnout can be broken down into these three areas: our calling, or decreased sense of satisfaction in our calling, apathy, and indifference. And you can see I've kind of related them to the general burnout sections as well. So what does this mean? How does this affect our faith? Our calling, obviously, is the conviction that we have for working in the field, doing God's work, connected with our higher power or divine. When we are experiencing burnout, from a Christian perspective, we might question our calling. Really might question, am I in the right field? Is this really where I'm supposed to be? Not feeling fulfilled in doing God's work or offering our services in a way that meets our needs spiritually. It takes it a little bit further than perceived professional accomplishment. It takes it down into our faith. And now I'm not feeling accomplished in my faith, in my calling, in my belief. I'm really questioning whether this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Some of the effects, so becoming a Martha-like character, right? We might start to try and work harder to try and feel that calling again. So we're working and maybe we're engaging in more and more prayer, or we're trying to get to church, or we're trying to engage, and we become a Martha-like character in the sense of just striving for that connection, when sometimes all we need is a pause and to sit with God, as opposed to working and adding and moving towards that. So some of the self-care practices that we'll go over today are active. There are things that would incorporate more like active work. Some of them are pauses and place for self-reflection. And we'll go over that towards then. Apathy. The study that outlines this, I think, outlined it really well. They said, apathy is self-eviscerating and empty. And I read that and I went, ugh, that's just so deep, self-eviscerating. I don't think I would ever want to get to that point, right? Feeling that self-eviscerating and emptiness that often comes. We stop to care from a Christian perspective about people. We're disconnecting with our communities. We're disconnecting with the work that we're doing. We're disconnecting with our emotions, the spiritual fulfillment that we might have when we used to engage before burnout with our clients or with our colleagues. That starts to go away. We stop having a spiritual connection to the work that we're doing. And it's not just our calling, it then becomes that spiritual connection or that fulfillment that we used to get, we eventually lose. One thing to note is burnout is not unchristian or a lack of faith. It's something that is We know from the statistics, common in our field, and it's something that we can work towards diminishing. The third portion of the third, kind of area of Christian burnout is indifference. This again sits in line with depersonalization from a general sense. We really just kind of have a disregard for people, a disregard for God's creatures, a disregard for life. We might start to feel that life is purposeless, start to feel disingenuous in the work. Maybe you used to sit, and when clients would ask you to pray, you could pray and you could really be present in that prayer. And maybe it starts to look less and less or feel less and less like you're present in that. Or maybe you don't want to, maybe you say no. Callousness or anger with God can come up as well. We become emotionally detached here, and then we start to pull away and become angry from our community, God, or your higher power, whatever that looks like. So quote here from Jeremiah 12, "Lord, if I argue with you, you are always right. But I want to ask you about some things that don't seem right. Why are wicked people successful? Why do people you cannot trust have such easy lives?" These are some of the questions that might start to come up as we hit indifference from a Christian burnout perspective. This is just connecting general burnout to a Christian perspective. Now we're going to step into secondary trauma. Secondary trauma, but in the helping profession, between 15 and 34% of people met diagnosis levels for secondary trauma. Emotional distress is secondary trauma is emotional distress that is experienced from hearing continuous chronic details of an abuse, of a violence, of some sort of trauma. It can lead to PTSD. It's actually now in the DSM, listed in criteria A4 for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's listed as experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to aversive details of the traumatic events. So if you're working with clients who have experienced trauma, which is a lot of our clients, if you're working with children who have experienced trauma and you're hearing these stories and maybe you're doing narrative work, and so you're hearing the details of these stories as they're rewriting them, that can affect us just as much as actually having experienced it. So now we have burnout in the ICD, and we have our work listed as a potential to lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. So we need to intervene. We need to take some steps to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves. Okay. It can lead to, from a Christian perspective, these are the effects on our faith, questioning the meaning of life, feeling anger towards God. There's the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to my clients? If God is good, why are people experiencing all of these evil things and this evilness? The hopelessness and really kind of taking our client suffering home with us. We talk about that across the helping professions. Don't take work home with you. We don't mean paperwork. Don't do that either. But also the stress, the emotion, the connection, what's happening, the stories. How do we leave that in a place where it can be safe, but I'm not taking it home and internalizing that? Another thing to point out, and I'll just touch on this briefly, is role ambiguity. A lot of us who are in the helping profession, but also identify with Christian faith or any type of faith really, can experience some sort of role ambiguity, especially if you're in the helping profession working at a faith-based agency, like the Hope and Healing Center. There may be times where I'm like, okay, I'm not a minister, but I'm working at an Episcopal entity. Like, how does this work? Where's my role? If clients are asking me, how much do I share? So really trying to manage those boundaries, especially if you're a new service provider in the industry. Like, how do I set those boundaries, and how do I still feel like I'm reaching my calling, but also hitting the ethical standards of my profession? How do I manage those two? And that can be challenging. And then the stress that's related to that comes with it. So we know these can harm ourselves and our clients. But into the good stuff, what we want, right? There is a brighter side. This is why you're all here, is to learn about some of the practices that we can do, some contemplative work and self-care, mindfulness practices. We know that there's a relationship between burnout and compassion satisfaction. So as burnout goes up, compassion satisfaction goes down, and inverse. As compassion satisfaction goes up, burnout goes down. Compassion satisfaction is broken into emotional intelligence, perceived work-life balance, and perceived autonomy at work. These three things we can hit on with mindfulness and practices and self-care to be able to reduce the potential for burnout. But compassion satisfaction is obviously the amount of satisfaction that we get from our job, the joy that we receive in helping people, and at the end of the day, how much are we saying, yes, I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing in my role. How does this play into self-care? Mindfulness merges breath, body, and cognitive awareness. So when we talk about burnout and compassion satisfaction, we switch over to self-care and mindfulness as a way to mitigate burnout. Mindfulness incorporates the body, it incorporates the mind, it incorporates the spirit, and it can increase our metacognitions, it can increase our emotional intelligence, it can increase our consciousness on a day-to-day and our connection with our higher power, a sense of peace. We know that mindfulness practices help reduce psychological distress that helping professionals experience in the workplace. And we know that it is positively associated with self-compassion and serenity. So mindfulness is associated with self-compassion and serenity. My slides are doing something weird. So when we think of compassion satisfaction and mindfulness practices help us focus on our emotions, our self-compassion, and our serenity. And by increasing those, we're increasing our compassion satisfaction. So mindfulness helps with serenity, peace, and our emotional intelligence. And if we think about, if we come back to this slide, emotional intelligence is a part of compassion satisfaction. So mindfulness activities actually play a part in increasing one of the things that we experience when we think about compassion satisfaction. And as we increase compassion satisfaction, we mitigate burnout. So mindfulness and self-care activities come in and can help address some of the issues that may be of compassion satisfaction that we may be missing when we are working towards burnout. From a Christian perspective, Christian burnout and mindfulness, we're using this mindfulness, and we'll run through some here in a second, but mindfulness using our body, our mind, our spirit, everything, our breath, we can use that to tune in, to pause and tune in to our calling. What am I feeling? I used to feel this way. Today, I'm not feeling this way. Let me pause for a moment and reflect on that. Maybe sit with that, sit with God. We can use mindfulness practices to find God's grace in that moment, or remind ourselves that it's there, even if we don't feel it, when we're working towards apathy and maybe losing that grace that we used to have towards the clients or the people that we're working with. And mindfulness really can just be used as a pause to help us find our breath and to help us regain any amount of energy in the moment so we can pour into ourselves when we so often are pouring into other people, right? That kind of really well-known verse, right? Can't pour from an empty cup. Mindfulness can be used to fill that cup, to pause and reflect and say, maybe not fill it, but maybe just notice, oh, My cup's empty right now. I need to pause because I'm pouring from an empty cup and I'm working towards burnout. So give us the goods already. Okay. Let's see. We're diving into the actual practices. I'm not going to run through all of them with you. But like I said, you have this PowerPoint available. This is one that my colleague Veronica created and put together. And I actually practice this. I think it's wonderful. So find a place to sit, set nothing out, leave your phone, journal, Bible. Don't bring your Bible. We're thinking from a Christian perspective. We go, that's weird. You're telling me to not take my Bible? Yes, don't take your Bible. Everything, leave it behind. Go outside, wherever you can kind of pause and feel the least distracted that you can. That may not be total peace, but as least distracted as you can. Invite God to sit with you, sit in the silence. You can talk, whether that's an internal talk or an external talk. You can listen. Try not to focus on this being necessarily a time of prayer. If prayer works for you, that's wonderful. But listen and reflect and sit with this contemplative practice and really just kind of think, what's going on? What is God saying to me? What have I been saying to God? Allow yourself to smile, literally smile. There's a note up there that says talking about it, applying it with DBT. We have a DBT program here, and one of the skills is half smile. You can just do this little half smile to work towards changing mood. So if you're practicing this and you're not in a place where smiling feels like something you want to do, you may practice that skill in addition to this. We often see skills merging. And trust that in the moment, you're where you're supposed to be. The emotion that you're experiencing is valid. And this practice is going to be what it is. It doesn't have to be done a certain perfect way. It's going to be, you can do what you can in that moment to make it what you need. There's some rules that she's listed out here. Do this for a time, but don't rush it. Don't extend it to try and make it what you think it needs to be, which is kind of what I was just speaking to. We've listed out all of these words right here. And this is a starting point for you. You can adapt it, you can adjust it, do with it what you need. There's no perfect way. There's the right way for you in that moment, and it may look different a different day. Resist the urge to write or share anything profound that happens. I love that she put that because it makes me really envious that she has profound things happening to her when she's doing this. Sometimes I walk away and I go, I don't feel anything profound then. But you might, but resist the urge to write it down because that can pull from the moment. It can pull from that practice, that contemplation that you're sitting in. If you find yourself back to your to-do list, back to thinking about work, right? That thought, that train comes into your mind, just shoo it away, do your best. Oh, that's not what I'm doing right now. I'm doing this practice, I'm sitting, I'm being, and try to come back to that moment, that mindfulness moment that we're in, that contemplative work. If it comes up again, push it away again. This is where people can find mindfulness practices really challenging because we're thinking about, okay, I'm going to be peaceful, I'm going to be calm, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to think nothing about nothing. And that's not really how mindfulness works for everyone. Oftentimes our to-do lists and work and stress and, oh my gosh, did I turn my curling iron off this morning? It's a big one for me. Did I turn my curling iron off? I've turned around several times. Those come rushing in and it really detracts from that moment. So when that happens, instead of judging ourselves, instead of getting frustrated, instead of giving up and going, oh, I can't do this, recognize the frustration, recognize the anger, recognize maybe the physical pain. I know sometimes physical pain comes in when we're paying attention to the moment, and try and shove that away and come back to the practice of being present. This is why it doesn't have to be a 30-minute long practice. This 30 minutes is a long time. It can be 2 minutes, it can be 3 minutes. It's a starting point, and you will adapt this for yourself or with clients, however you find you need. Here's another one where she actually the Bible that we discarded in the first practice, we're now bringing back in. And so you pull out your Bible, you're going to read through some Psalms, and sit with that scripture, feeling the discomfort, feeling whatever you're feeling, and kind of walking through that. Oops, where am I? I want to go to this one. Okay. Really what I want to get into is building our own spiritual self-care practice, which is hopefully something that you all were hoping to get from today. You can do this right now. You can do this later, whatever works best for you, if you're listening to this at work. But the way you would do this is you would sit down and you make a list of verses or scripture that have been important to you. Anything that comes up, it's good to write down. And then you'll make a list of practices or rituals that you are drawn to. So these we're talking from a spiritual self-care practice, right? So is it prayer? Is it attending church? Is it reading scripture? Is it baptism? Lighting a candle? And then make a list of special places. They can be sacred or ordinary that are special to you, that you like. Here's an example of what Veronica and I laid out. It's kind of small. I hope you can read that. I'm going to just walk through mine. It's not to speak to hers, but verses and prayers. I put 2 Corinthians. We do know what we do. We do not know what we do, but we do not give up the hope of living, right? Sometimes we don't know what we're doing. I feel that a lot at work sometimes. I'm like, I don't actually know what's going on. But I don't give up hope that I can figure it out, that even if I'm feeling bad today, I may not feel bad tomorrow. One thing, a practice that really gets me, music is big for me. So listening to music, Christian music, praise music, all of that is something that I really find. I often find myself crying when I'm listening to it, even if it's like an upbeat song, but it's something that in that moment I'm focused on and I can pay attention to. And for me, that's kind of a conversation with God. I may not be the person to sit down and kind of have this traditional prayer of what we think about or have a conversation. The way I do that is through music oftentimes. Now I still pray and do the kind of typical things we think about, but working to find a way that really fits your spiritual needs is important. And so listing these out can be helpful to get you to that point. And then places, church, the church that I was raised in, a silent car or on a walk. Sometimes when I'm walking, I am bombarded with all of the things I have to do. And sometimes when I'm walking, I can be present and go, wow, outside is beautiful. And I can sit and think about how all of this was created and when it came to be. And watching plants grow is another one that I find just magical. And in that moment, I'm not thinking about the stress and all of that. I'm thinking about how God created life out of nothingness, right? So as you've done that, as you list out a prayer, a place, and a ritual, you can then start to think about what makes these things special to you. I kind of listed out some of the reasons that these things are special to me, but what makes them special to you? Maybe there's a special connection to family. Maybe there's something that there's a spiritual connection that you used to feel. And as we're doing these to mitigate burnout, we might start to remember, oh, I remember what it felt like to have that connection. I remember what it felt like. I kind of remember when I felt like my calling was true. This is what the calling that I'm meant to have. It can bring us back, right? Everything that comes to mind, this can just be like a throw it down on a piece of paper session. It doesn't have to be, there's no right way or perfect way of doing it. And then you can think of in terms of how it affects your 5 senses, which I outline here on the next. So a walk and talk with God, I kind of said, going on a walk, sometimes I'm not thinking about, God, sometimes I'm thinking about work, but sometimes I really try and take myself out into nature to try and step away and connect with my spiritual side again. So how can we use our senses to connect? For me, it's hard for me to go outside and go, okay, I'm going to connect with God. And then I feel the connection. It doesn't happen like that for me. And so if that happens for you, again, I'm envious, and that's wonderful, but that doesn't happen for everyone. So I have to be very intentional and use some of these practices to be able to feel that connection, and we can use our body, we can use our mind, we can use our senses to connect and take a break. This is something that can take 5 minutes that you can go do at lunch. And I have to be honest right now, I'm talking about self-care, giving a lecture on it, right, or a talk about it. And I haven't taken a walk at lunch or done this 5-minute thing in months. And I'm going, oh, how am I standing up here preaching about that? And that shame kind of just came over, right? So while the shame is there, it's not an active place for it. It's not the right place for it. I can always take steps to do this again. You know, taking steps to take care of yourself. Or when you're in the season of when you don't have the place, shame is not the appropriate. I haven't done anything to anyone, maybe upset or with myself, right? But anyways, when I get back into these walk and talks that I used to do, connect with the feelings, with feeling of the ground, the wind, the temperature, what's it like outside. I don't usually do these in the summer because it's very hot here in Texas, Houston. I typically like the cool weather, which we're losing. So I'm realizing I have to wait a whole nother season until we get that back. Yeah, in Texas, we have 2 seasons, winter and summer, mostly summer. What does the air smell like? What does it smell like? Am I smelling something else? Is it just kind of air? Does it feel really fresh? Sometimes in Houston, it's not really fresh. Can I taste anything? Is my mouth dry? Do I have gum? Sometimes through smell, we can taste. Maybe there's flowers or freshly cut grass, right? What of God's creation do you see? You can imagine that God is walking with you. You're pointing things out that he created. Kind of creating that image in your mind, if that's something that is helpful to you. And then what do you hear? You may hear the birds, you may hear the traffic, you may hear cars. Are you hearing any message from God? Is there any conversation happening there? Are you saying anything to him? Is he saying anything to you? And then you go back to your day. I think we often think mindfulness or self-care practices, there is going to be some sort of immediate relief or sense of peace always following. And that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes there is. Sometimes we get that. Sometimes we don't. And it becomes a practice of taking a moment of pause. So when you walk away from some of these practices, the first time you might go, oh, this didn't really help. I would encourage you to try it a few times, maybe adjust it some, because even taking minutes to pause and think about actively engaging in these practices is a break from the work, is a break from our helping profession. We're helping ourselves, and even just a break can help. So, oops, where am I going? Some of the things that we've talked about at the beginning of today, I had you list out some of the practices that you are doing, some of the ones that you're not doing that you might want to be doing. We've walked through some of the ways that you can use nature, you can use space, you can use your senses to in some contemplative practices. So how can you incorporate all of this into something that is soothing and workable and doable for you? What we want to avoid is making it more work for ourselves, in a sense. We're with implementing self-care or mindfulness. We are trying to mitigate burnout, essentially. If it seems too hard, if any of these, even today, seem like that's a lot of work, do less. That's okay. Do less. Do a part of it. Take 5 seconds to even say, I should probably do a mindfulness right now. I could, that might be helpful. and then get back to work, right? If that's better than nothing, you're bringing awareness. So I hope you walk away from here today with some of these practices that you're going, yes, I love this. I'm going to use it. I'm going to adapt it. I may introduce it to some of my clients, family, my children, they may love this. But if you're going, none of these seem plausible for me. I don't really feel like any of this is something that I can incorporate today. That's okay. That's fine. Keep in mind that self-care is something that needs to happen, whether it's happening today or not. The awareness is important. It's the first step to really actually being able to implement that. So if that's what you're at today, I'm happy. I'm happy that you're here. I'm happy that you're listening. It's one step towards taking these and implementing them and adapting them to your needs. This is an example of something that I do or did. If I was going to make that list at the beginning of today, this would not be on it because I've not been doing it. But stretching at work, I have a lacrosse ball where I'll pause and say gratitudes in my head about things that I'm grateful for that day, and I'll roll the lacrosse ball on my back between the wall. It sits at my desk and I look at it and I go, I should roll my back out. I should practice some of this stuff. And then I don't sometimes, and that's okay. I have it sitting out as a reminder. But it's 5 seconds. I mean, I can do it for 10 minutes. I can do it for 1 minute. It's really whatever I can in that moment. And sometimes in that moment, I can't do anything. So while I hope you walk away with these resources and going, yes, this is something I want to start working on. If it's not, put it in your pocket. You can pull it out another day. Yeah. Here's some other resources that Veronica put together. She's some of these you've probably heard of. There's some books listed here and all of our references there. So as we think about burnout in the helping profession, as we think about our compassion fatigue that's coming up and vicarious and secondary trauma that we experience as helping professionals, it can seem overwhelming. It can seem as though it's something that we will never be able to conquer. And if we think about it in the sense of the monster that it is, that it exists, we may not be able to get rid of it. It's something that's always going to exist. Evil will always be present. We will always be stressed. There are things that are always going to stress us. Life doesn't just pause inevitably, right? This is where mindfulness can be so crucial, even if just for seconds, being able to mitigate the stress that we deal with as helping professionals in the workplace, developing a self-care routine that may incorporate contemplative work can be really vital for a Christian social worker or helping professional to be able to still feel their calling, to still feel connected to people, to still feel connected to their faith communities, to God, to still feel like they want to care and like they're doing something and they're making a difference. So if that's not you today, if that's not what you're feeling at work and you're going, I don't really like it here, I just feel like blah, I feel so emotionally drained, I would encourage you to, if not even this, talk to someone, find a way to practice some sort of self-care if this is not it for you today. But yeah, thank you all for being here.